She lay against the cold metal floor of the evacuation shelter, her back pressed flat, one knee bent awkwardly where the blood had already begun to dry. The wound on her side was deep enough to soak through the torn fabric, yet she made no sound. No groan, no sharp intake of breath, not even the trembling whimper the medic had learned to expect from civilians pulled out of combat zones. Her eyes stayed open, steady, tracking movement with quiet awareness. To anyone passing by, she looked broken and exhausted. To someone who knew battle, something about her stillness felt wrong. The SEAL medic knelt beside her, gloved hands moving automatically as he assessed damage. He had treated men twice her size who screamed louder over half this pain. Shrapnel wounds, internal bruising, shock. He had seen it all. Yet this woman barely reacted when he pressed near the injury. Her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, muscles along her neck flexing. Then she relaxed again as if she had consciously pushed the pain somewhere else. That kind of control didn't come from luck. It came from conditioning. Dust hung in the air, the distant thump of artillery echoing like a slow heartbeat. Around them, chaos moved nonstop. Stretchers being dragged, radios crackling, boots running back and forth. Still, she remained silent, breathing slow and measured, each inhale deliberate. Her hands rested near her sides, fingers curled slightly, not limp but ready, as though even injured she hadn't forgotten awareness. The medic noticed the small details, the way she kept her chin lifted to protect her airway, the way her shoulders stayed squared instead of collapsing inward. These were habits learned, drilled, repeated under stress. He asked her name, she answered quietly, voice steady, no tremor. He asked if she could feel her legs. She nodded once. When he cleaned the wound, she stared past him, eyes unfocused but alert, like someone counting seconds in their head. Pain should have broken through by now. Shock should have dulled her responses. Instead, she seemed present, too present. To everyone else, she was just another wounded survivor pulled from the edge of a firefight. But the medic felt the disconnect growing stronger. Civilians cried, begged, apologized for bleeding on his gear. Trained soldiers clenched their teeth and swore. This woman did neither. Her silence wasn't fear. It was discipline. The kind that forms when someone has learned that noise costs energy, and energy can mean survival. A distant explosion shook the shelter, lights flickering briefly. Instinctively, her head turned toward the sound before she caught herself. Just a fraction of a second too fast, the medic noticed. Reflex like that wasn't natural. It was trained, honed under live fire. Even wounded, even grounded, her body still responded as if threats mattered. She looked fragile lying there, pale under the harsh lighting, blood staining her clothes. But beneath the surface, something unbroken remained. She wasn't enduring the pain because she had no choice. She was enduring it because she had learned how. And though no one else realized it yet, the medic already knew one thing for certain. This woman was not what she appeared to be. The medic had learned to trust his instincts long before he earned the trident on his uniform. Experience had taught him that the body always told the truth, even when words didn't. As he worked, he felt that familiar unease settle in the quiet signal that something didn't fit the situation in front of him. She should have been panicking, or at least asking questions. Instead, she watched him with calm, assessing eyes, as if she were the one measuring him. He adjusted the tourniquet and checked her pulse, strong, controlled, not racing the way it should have been after blood loss and trauma. When he leaned closer, her gaze never wavered. There was no pleading in it, no fear of what might happen next. It was the look of someone who trusted process and procedure, someone who understood exactly what he was doing and why. That kind of awareness usually belonged to soldiers who had spent years under medical checks before and after missions. The medic cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "You've been in fights before?" he asked, keeping his tone casual, as if he were making small talk. He expected confusion, maybe denial. Instead, she hesitated just long enough to consider the question, then gave a small, noncommittal shrug. It wasn't an answer, but it wasn't ignorance either. Authority had entered the space, and mystery had followed close behind. Around them, SEALs moved with practiced urgency, nodding to the medic as they passed. This was their domain. Controlled chaos, sharp commands, unspoken understanding. Civilians usually shrank in environments like this, overwhelmed by the speed and confidence of trained operators. She didn't. Her shoulders remained relaxed, her breathing steady, as if she belonged here, even if she wasn't wearing their uniform. He noticed her hands again. Despite the injury, despite the exhaustion, they were cleanly positioned, palms down, thumbs tucked in. Not defensive, not desperate, neutral. The posture of someone who knew how not to draw attention, how to conserve strength. The medic had seen that same posture on new operators during their first deployments, before arrogance replaced caution. He asked where she learned to handle pain like this. This time her eyes flickered away just briefly. Not in fear, but in calculation. She weighed the cost of answering. That alone told him everything. Untrained people spoke too much under stress. They filled silence with noise. She respected silence. She used it. A helicopter roared overhead, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. Without thinking, she adjusted her breathing to the rhythm of the sound, grounding herself. The medic caught the movement out of the corner of his eye and felt a chill run down his spine. That technique was taught in high-stress training programs to keep heart rate down under pressure. It wasn't something picked up from movies or second-hand stories. He straightened slightly, studying her now with open curiosity instead of quiet concern. Whoever she was, she carried herself like someone who had been tested and shaped by authority, far greater than this battlefield shelter. The rank on his chest no longer felt like an advantage. It felt like an introduction. And as he prepared to ask the question that would change everything, he realized he wasn't dealing with a victim. He was dealing with an unknown variable, and in his world, those were often the most dangerous. The moment stretched longer than it should have. The medic finished securing the bandage but didn't move away. Experience told him when to step back, when to let the body rest, yet something kept him there. He wiped his gloves against his pants, eyes still on her, and finally asked the question that had been forming since the first second he touched her wound. "Where did you learn to move like that?" His voice was low, almost casual, but the shelter felt quieter the instant the words left his mouth. For the first time since she'd been brought in, her control slipped just barely. Her jaw tightened, and she exhaled through her nose, slow and deliberate, as if steadying herself before a difficult climb. She didn't answer right away. Silence filled the gap, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant radio chatter and the muted thrum of engines outside. The medic didn't rush her. He knew better. Pressure made civilians ramble, but it made trained people shut down. She finally turned her head and looked directly at him, not past him, not away at him. There was a sharpness in her eyes now, something awake and calculating, as if a switch had been flipped internally. The wounded survivor was gone, replaced by someone assessing risk. "Does it matter?" she asked quietly. Her voice wasn't defensive, it was precise. That was when the medic felt it, the unmistakable shift. This wasn't curiosity on her part. It was operational thinking. She was gauging how much information he had, how much he needed, and what could safely be revealed. That mindset didn't come from surviving one bad day. It came from years of training where questions weren't harmless and answers carried consequences. He chose his next words carefully. "It matters if I need to know what else you're capable of," he said. "People don't handle pain like you are without learning how." He expected denial, maybe a vague excuse. Instead, she studied his face, reading him the same way he'd been reading her. The medic realized, not for the first time, that authority didn't always come from rank. Sometimes it came from shared understanding. Another explosion rolled through the distance, closer this time. Without being told, she adjusted her body slightly, angling herself toward the exit, injured side protected, line of sight clear. It was instinctive, automatic. The medic followed her movement and swallowed hard. No civilian thought like that, not wounded, not exhausted. She finally spoke again, her words measured. "I was taught not to talk about it," she said, no bravado. No drama, just fact, and I was taught to keep going until I couldn't. Her eyes flicked briefly to her wound, then back to his. "I'm not there yet." The question had done exactly what he suspected it would. It cracked the surface without breaking it open. He didn't know her past. Not yet, but he knew enough now to be certain of one thing. Whatever training she carried wasn't casual, and it wasn't recent. It was carved into her reflexes, buried deep enough that even pain couldn't reach it. As he stood to signal for evacuation, the medic felt a strange mix of respect and caution settle in his chest. He had asked a simple question. He hadn't expected it to redraw the entire picture, and as he looked back at her, wounded, silent, and unmistakably prepared, he knew the real story hadn't even begun. The revelation didn't come as a dramatic confession or a long explanation. It arrived in fragments, slipping through the cracks of necessity and circumstance. As the medic waved over a radio operator to coordinate evacuation, one of the SEALs paused nearby, glancing down at her wound. "She stable?" he asked. Before the medic could answer, she spoke. "Stable enough for movement. Left flank compromised. Watch the approach." Her words were calm, clipped, and unmistakably tactical. The SEAL froze for half a second. It was subtle, but the medic saw it. Those weren't the words of a frightened survivor. They were the words of someone trained to think in sectors and vulnerabilities. The radio operator looked up sharply, eyes narrowing with sudden interest. The medic felt the weight of the moment settle over the shelter. Something had just shifted, and everyone in earshot felt it. "Left flank," the SEAL repeated. "You see something." She nodded slightly toward the entrance, eyes never leaving the shadows beyond the makeshift doorway. "Pattern's wrong, too quiet. If they come, it won't be loud." There was no panic in her voice, no urgency for attention, just information offered because it mattered. The medic followed her line of sight. He didn't see anything at first, but instinct told him not to dismiss her. He relayed the warning up the chain without hesitation. Minutes later, movement was detected exactly where she indicated, hostiles probing, cautious, nearly invisible. The SEALs adjusted their perimeter just in time. A potential ambush dissolved before it could form. When the tension eased, the looks directed at her had changed completely. No longer curiosity, no longer suspicion. It was respect earned, immediate, and undeniable. One of the operators crouched beside her, studying her face. "You military?" he asked. She shook her head once. "Not officially," she replied. That answer landed harder than any admission. The medic felt a chill. Not officially meant off. Books, classified, the kind of training that didn't show up in records and didn't invite questions. He thought back to her pain tolerance, her posture, her breathing control, the way she assessed threats, even while bleeding. It all clicked into place with unsettling clarity. The operator leaned back on his heels, exchanging a look with the medic. No words were needed. They both understood now. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't luck. She had been shaped by elite-level training, whether intelligence, special operations, or something even more obscure. Whatever it was, it rivaled their own. As the evacuation team prepared the stretcher, she allowed herself a small exhale, tension easing just slightly. The mask slipped for a moment, revealing exhaustion beneath the discipline. Even then, she didn't complain. She didn't ask what would happen next. People with ordinary lives worried about tomorrow. People like her worried about mission completion. When they lifted her, the medic met her eyes one last time. There was a silent acknowledgement between them, an understanding forged without words. He had come in expecting to treat a wounded civilian. Instead, he had crossed paths with a warrior operating in the shadows, someone whose skills had just altered the battlefield in quiet, decisive ways. The shock wasn't in who she was. It was in realizing how easily she had hidden it, and how close they all had come to underestimating her. By the time the stretcher straps were secured, no one spoke to her the way they had when she first arrived. The hurried voices softened, the questions stopped. Even the SEALs, men hardened by years of combat and loss, moved with a subtle awareness around her, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Respect didn't arrive with salutes or praise. It settled quietly in the way they gave her space, in the way they listened when she spoke, and in the way no one asked her to explain herself anymore. As the evacuation team lifted her, she winced for the first time. Just a brief tightening around the eyes quickly masked. The medic noticed but said nothing. Pain had finally found a crack, yet even now she refused to give it control. That restraint said more than any confession ever could. She wasn't proving anything. She had already done that. Inside the helicopter, the noise swallowed conversation. Vibration rattled through the metal frame as they lifted off. The medic secured himself across from her, monitoring vitals, adjusting lines. When turbulence hit, her hand instinctively moved to stabilize herself, fingers hooking into the webbing with practiced ease. She released it a moment later, realizing she had been seen. The medic met her gaze and gave a small nod. No judgment, no questions, just understanding. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself one breath of rest. Not sleep, never sleep, but a controlled pause, the kind learned in environments where rest was borrowed, not given. Around her, operators checked weapons, scanned terrain through open doors, prepared for contingencies that might never come. And yet, despite her injuries, despite being strapped down and bleeding, she felt like one of them. Not by rank or uniform, but by mindset. When the helicopter touched down at the forward medical site, the team moved quickly. As they transferred her, a young SEAL glanced at her and hesitated before speaking. "You saved us back there," he said simply. She opened her eyes and looked at him, studying his face as if committing it to memory. "You were already doing your job," she replied. "I just helped. No pride, no deflection, just truth." The medic watched that exchange carefully. He had treated heroes who demanded recognition and cowards who pretended bravery. She was neither. Her confidence didn't need witnesses. Her strength didn't need validation. That was the final confirmation. Whatever path had shaped her, it had stripped away the need for approval and replaced it with purpose. As the medical staff took over, the SEALs stepped back. There was nothing more to say. They had seen what mattered. She hadn't asked for respect, hadn't announced who she was or what she could do. She earned it the only way that ever counted, through action, restraint, and clarity under pressure. Before disappearing behind the medical tent curtains, she looked back once, meeting the medic's eyes. There was a faint nod, almost imperceptible, a quiet acknowledgement between two professionals who recognized the same truth from opposite sides of the line. Wounded or not, uniform or not, she was a warrior. And in the end, that was how she would be remembered, not as a casualty pulled from the battlefield, but as someone who endured, acted, and left behind a silence filled with respect.